Thank you, and welcome Tadeusz, who's our moderator, and for coordinating this presentation. It's actually the first sort of public presentation about our global library work, which we've been working on for many years. I did want to express our special thanks to Naomi Schachter from the National Library, who was our primary contact and really our chief tour guide for the treasures of the National Library of Israel. Hi, Naomi, I think you might be on with us, which is great. And also to Aviad Stolman, who was very patient when responded to our last minute request to see very special items from the extraordinary collection that the library holds. And a special thanks really to all of the staff at the library that we met. And thank you for opening your departments and your collections to Bob and myself to photograph, and especially to Oren Weinberg, the director. The library hosted us for 2 months, so we really were in everybody's department there and trying to cause a little trouble to everyone. And outside of the library, I wanted to thank Noah Turgeman, who is the Fulbright Foundation officer in the office in Tel Aviv, and to Lisa Wishman, who was from the State Department and ran the American Center in Jerusalem. And then I guess Tadeusz gave a little bit of an introduction, but I thought it might be helpful for a little background to talk about how Bob and I kind of came into this project. We spent, as the intro mentioned, almost more than 40 years looking at landscape and the environment, both as a curator and Bob as a instructor and a practicing photographer, looking at landscape and the environment issues, and really the public commons. What were these resources that were available to us, and how can we protect and preserve those? And we came together to work on a photo project together in 1990 when we founded the Water in the West project, which was a very sort of loose collaboration of 11 photographers. And we got together mostly 2 times a year to look at work and look at water issues in the American West. And again, it was to look at the commons, what we share and what we really need to take responsibility for as citizens to preserve and protect. So it really wasn't much of a stretch to go from that landscape work in the American West for Bob to start photographing every public library in San Francisco. And I will turn it over to him, and he's going to do a slideshow that will primarily focus on our most recent work, the Global Library Project. So I'll turn it over to him and we'll get the slideshow going.
Okay, this will be primarily visual slides. So we'll have Tadeusz go ahead and start that now and put up the first slide. While he's doing that, I'll go ahead and thank everyone for being here. This is a great moment for us. It's our first public expression of this large scale, multi-year project. So we're not, at this point, we're not completely have our act together yet. We're still working on it, but this will be our debut. This is the opening act, and we'll take it from there. So I wanted to go ahead and show the first slide if we could.
Yeah,
this is our debut, and we'll work through this. I wanted to kind of go through, give you a little bit of a background, and I'd like to be able to go to the next slide. Do it here. And we can see a little bit of the background of what we've done in the past. I did an 18-year study of public libraries throughout the United States, and this is the book on the left came out of that with a forward by Bill Moyers and afterward by Ann Patchett, a number of other 15 different writers that were donated their writing to the book just in appreciation of this institution called the Public Library. And I photographed throughout the United States, and from that project came commissioned to photograph the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., which was another, for us, fascinating experience, and one of the great repositories of Shakespeare material, early modern material in the world. We also got a Fulbright Fellowship in 2018, 2019 to travel to Europe. And we were sponsored by the National Libraries of Italy, Greece, and Israel. So while we were there, we began to develop and look at this, what we call foreign libraries, libraries different than the American libraries. I'm always fascinated by the stories that come out of libraries. And it's interesting to begin to see how different those stories are with those different histories. So this is actually the first civic library in Europe, built in 1454 in Cesena, Italy. Made this image in 2018. And it's very much of the medieval model. You can see the books are chained to the desks and there's no lights inside the library. It's all lit by window light. And it was just absolutely fascinating to see this kind of early version of what learning in libraries could be. They actually used two keys to open this, one the nobility and one was owned by the peasants. And they had to come together to actually physically open the doors of this library, which was fascinating to us. On the other end of the scale, the sort of modern new libraries that we looked at, this was in Calgary, Canada, on a 2019 trip across Canada. And this is one of the great modern architectural libraries that we were very impressed. It's also a very vital library. It's considered one of the great libraries of the world. Fascinating in terms of what it represents. So this is sort of shows the range of what we were looking at. The programming, very aware of the native culture there and uses that to bring in indigenous artists and have meetings with the elders within the library. It was just a real appropriate library for this very vibrant and vital city on the plains of Canada and Alberta, Canada. We also began to, as I said, look at this sense of what is a national library and just the idea that libraries contain memories of the culture they are in. This is the National Library of Greece in Athens in 2018. It's the first library that we went to on the Fulbright that we spent 2 months in each of the countries, and this library was our host. And they were so welcoming and so accommodating. And this new library that you see here was built kind of as a bold experiment in the future of libraries. It's really almost the opposite of a lot of the smaller, older European libraries, which I think justifiably protected their resources and kept things kind of under wraps. Access was less important. And this library, of course, was built in the opposite direction, that accessibility to the collection was paramount. Books were out on the shelves, and it was very encouraging to see the number of people just flocking to use this magnificent library. On the other hand, in 2016, part of our trip took us to Moscow, and we photographed this 1930s Soviet era library called the Russian State Library. It used to be called the Lenin Library. And this was, we took an all-day tour of this library and we're just astonished by the architectural details, styles inside the library, the rich cultural tradition of this library. It was just quite magnificent. On the other hand, there was a small struggling library in Moscow called the Chekhov Library that we went to on the same trip, and it had been an important place, or expression of the Russian writer Chekhov. It had played an important role during World War II, during the siege of Moscow. And it was, after the war, hosted an independent public English language lecture forum, which I don't think that's probably going on right now, but I hope it is, because it is one way that these very progressive Russians in Moscow were opening to the world. And of course, Chekhov is such a rich vein of information and understanding of the mysteries of the Russian soul. And I hope this library does well. We went to the libraries that were also perhaps the ones that you know from studying art history. This one, the Laurentian Library in Florence, Italy in 2018, originally designed by Michelangelo. This is in 1571. This was the Medici family's kind of expression of their coming into the world, an ecclesiastical world, as rich merchants. And it's considered architecturally one of the great achievements of Michelangelo. And this image is looking into the reading room, the red roof that you see in the bottom of the image. It was quite moving to be there and to see this in real life. And other just magnificent libraries that are an embodiment of historical memory. This section that we're covering deals with national libraries and memory. And this is the Hendrick Conscience Heritage Library in Antwerp, Belgium, 2016. Hendrick Conscience was a famous Flemish writer, one of the first to write and celebrate Flemish language. The globes in the background are celestial globes and earthly globes, terrestrial globes. It was a very rich experience to see this kind of almost overwhelmingly beautiful place. We also went to the little island of Corfu off the coast of Greece, northwestern coast of Greece. And this was an area that was in the Ionian Sea. And there's a little Corfu Reading Society housed in that building on the right that we photographed in 2018. And this was opened in 1836 to the public. And it's Greece's oldest cultural institution. And it's the home of the many famous artists and writers, and British writer Lawrence Durrell lived there and wrote about the community. It was historically just a rich experience for us too as well. We did go to the National Library of Ukraine in 2016 in Kiev, and this was one of the great experiences. We had an all-day tour we were given by the National Library, showing us their archives and collections. It was overwhelming. And this was one part of it. This is the collection of Jewish musical folklore, 1912 to 1947. And this is part of the UNESCO Memory of the World Register. It's truly one of the preservations of all of humanity that the United Nations and UNESCO has created. And these were Yiddish poets, singers, music, some of it preserved on wax cylinders. It's a priceless archive, and it's one of the things that I am most upset about, in addition to the incredible loss of life in Ukraine, is the loss of their cultural heritage. And this, I have not heard if this library has been bombed or not, but I hope not. So on the other hand, in Kiev in 2016, we saw this little library on the bottom. It's a kind of a branch library that was built during the Soviet times, and it was now surrounded by newly built oligarch-built high-rises in the background, apartment buildings. But it was such a sweet little library. It had on the outside the bas-relief of these horses and monkeys and lizards and cosmonauts floating through space. It was just, it's such an expression of when Ukraine was a Soviet republic prior to the end of their Cold War. We also, as I said, went to Canada, drove all the way across the country and visited some of the amazing, unique places. This was a little tiny library way up north, about 150 miles north of Regina, Saskatchewan. called the title is The Mural to Indigenous Martyr Almighty Voice in the Wapiti Regional Library, Duck Lake, Saskatchewan, Canada, 2019. And Almighty Voice was tragically killed in a gun battle with authorities in the 19th century. This area was the center of a large Native rebellion, the Northwest Rebellion of the 19th century. And it's also one of the places that had the indigenous Native American schools, residential schools. This was one of the last to close in 1996. We didn't realize that they had been going on that long. And that's a tragic part of North American history of the indigenous schools. And it also brought up, that history brought up our concern of the use of education. We've always been big proponents of education, and libraries part of that. But this kind of question whether or not in this case, even though the people, I think, starting these schools had good intentions, was this a form of cultural genocide to have these native indigenous schools with the kids taken away from their families and forced to learn English. This was probably the most difficult place for us to visit, was the Polish town of Auschwitz, which the Germans called Auschwitz, and it was 2016. And this is a picture in the left is a Soviet era apartments. And the bottom is a outdoor exhibition called for a group called the March of the Living, which brought young people and concentration camp survivors together in some of the death camps areas. And then on the right is the library, the Biblioteca. And interesting that the people of this community decided they wanted a library that kind of looked like a shopping mall, and they wanted to use it I think, kind of try to move on beyond their horrible past. It was a haunting place for us to visit. And the library had no indication of that past. It was interesting. The exhibition in the foreground was by an outside group. And so in a way, the library was built to forget that past. And I found that ironic because I'd seen so many libraries that were the repository of local memory. And here the library in this community was built to forget. We also had another category or area of interest for us was this thing called Bibliocide and the preservation of cultural resources. Bibliocide meaning the intentional or accidental destruction of books. And this is in Berlin, 2016. Our son Walker is on the left, Ellen is in the middle, and a friend of ours is on the right, and Anita. And this is in the square in front of the Humboldt University, where in 1933, the Nazis did their famous book burnings. And this is an art piece called The Empty Library. It's a memorial to Nazi book burning, Berlin, Germany, 2016. By the Israeli artist Mika Olman, very famous artist and very highly regarded. And the empty bookshelves that they're staring down into are equivalent to about 20,000 books that were the ones that were burned there. And there's a quote in a nearby plaque by poet Hendrick that says, that was but a prelude. Where they burn books, they will ultimately burn people as well. And this to me was an important image because it started us thinking in terms of this bibliocide, the destruction of books and culture and people, and the relationship between all of those. This actually was from the National Library of Israel. These are pages from a book that a passing Jewish man walking by right after the book burnings in Berlin in 1933 rescued these pages out of a book that had been burned during these book burnings. And later he moved to Israel, and later he donated these pages to the National Library. So the connection between these two images made the whole idea of this horrible part of the history of Europe real for us. We also went to a library in Nablus in West Bank and looked at this image of a book that was part of the prisoners section book, Nablus Library. And this was used as a Palestinian prisoners that were held in the Israeli prisons, self-education movement, and stimulated political debate among prisoners. And just another example of it, also the destruction of a book as well. Ancient Roman papyri, the papyri collection, Biblioteca Nazionale di Napoli, Naples, Italy, 2018. So one of the great things we discovered by being sponsored by the National Library of Italy in Naples was their papyri collection. The Vesuvius, Mount Vesuvius that erupted in 79 AD covered the city and town of Pompeii and nearby Herculaneum. And it buried a large library, privately held library, that was recovered and discovered in 1752. And in there were these carbonized papyri, these scrolls that had been destroyed, but in the process of being destroyed, they'd been preserved, which was this great irony. So while we were at the library in Naples for the 2 months we were there, they were, it turns out, the main repository of these scrolls. And there was a lot of research going on while we were there, of people using a new technology where they could actually look at these scrolls using laser and X-ray technology developed by NASA to read both sides of the scrolls. And it was a very interesting, fascinating process, but we were lucky to be in that library while that was going on. So, and then this is a book in a library destroyed by the German army in World War I and again in World War II in Louvain, Belgium, 2016. So this actually was shocking to me that beginning of World War I, the German army came into Belgium, and because some of the Belgian people were resisting, they burned down the library. And the library was a massive library that contained ancient manuscripts, unbelievable, irreplaceable stuff. The burning of the library caused a huge outroar around the world. People raised money, replaced the library, replaced the collection as best they could. Tragically, at the beginning of the Second World War, that library was hit again and destroyed completely again. So the collection was destroyed twice. This story really was the beginning of my interest in global libraries. Why did this happen? I can't comprehend why anybody would destroy a book or a library. And during World War II, more books were destroyed and libraries were destroyed than any other event in human history. So there was a lot of compelling stories and reasons why this was a very important place for us to go, and it began this part of this process of looking at libraries around the world. Another sad story in the library of the Church and Convent of the Girolami in Naples, Italy, 2018. Very famous story. It was written up in the New Yorker of the director of the library, stealing books and sometimes making exact copies of the books and selling them on the ancient book market. Just a tragedy. And we were there right after all this had ended, and the new librarian was trying to pick up the pieces, another form of the destruction of books. This is also part of this idea of bibliocide. At the end of World War II, a vast amount of books as well as artwork were discovered by American soldiers in Germany, in caves and various places. And one American officer decided to photograph the book placed in the books and to use those photos to then help return the books to the original owners, the Jewish owners of these books that in many cases perished in the Holocaust. This was a long-term project, and the National Library of Israel contains this the photographs of these book plates from
country.
Yeah, Czechoslovakia on the top left and Greece on the right. So these were from different countries that had been occupied during World War II. And then the books of the Public Historical Library of Andretsiana in Greece in 2018. This is in the Peloponnese. Very fascinating, kind of long story to make it short. A penniless Greek expat of staggering intelligence lived in Paris in the 19th century somehow put together this largest privately held library of that century. And he donated his entire library to his father's hometown, Athens in Greece. And he was cleaning the books one day, ready to ship them off, and he got a paper cut, and he died from the infection. So the books eventually did wind up going to the Peloponnese, and eventually wound up in the library. And this is considered one of the great libraries in Greece, and one of the great historical libraries. We also visited in Jerusalem the Torah doctor on the suggestion of the National Library. Machon Ott is kind of one of the great Torah repair and restoration people. He works in partnership with the National Library, and is the son of a Holocaust survivors, but truly a remarkable place and a remarkable man. The National Library in Florence, Italy, was flooded in 1966. It was one of the largest, over a third of the collection was just flooded, and never before had so many priceless books been water damaged in one event. And the technology, book conservation, wasn't up to dealing with that large number. So the whole field of book conservation changed and developed new techniques. And when we photographed there in the conservation lab, which is housed in an old convent in 2018, we saw them still repairing these books from the 1966 flood. Yeah. Another section, another part, another idea of our large global project is looking at refugees and libraries. We were very interested. I applied for the Fulbright actually based on that idea, because I wanted to see, we had traveled in Germany 2016, and we'd seen how refugees were taken in by the libraries, taught the language of the country, taught how to be a German citizen. So we were interested in seeing where other countries were dealing with the idea of refugees and libraries. And this is one that was put together in the Jungle refugee camp, which has since been destroyed in Calais, France. And for 5 years, this camp was most famous in Europe, and home to over 8,000 migrants trying to reach Europe, trying to reach England through the port of Calais. And we met the woman that started this, a British woman, and we wound up spending time with the people there and photographing this. Unfortunately, the French government just decided to get rid of the camp in 2016, and they bulldozed it, including this library. So the books left with the refugees once they were forced out of this. But that was an important place for us too as well. In Tel Aviv, we went to the Garden Library for Refugees and Migrant Workers in 2019. Again, the idea of refugees and libraries. This is put up, it's opened at night for the migrants and refugees because they work during the day, and it was the best time to bring the kids at night. And it's in an old bomb shelter, and it's this remarkable little structure that they open up at night, and it was packed when the night we were there. Again, kind of moving for us to be able to see this. We also went to a refugee camp in Athens. We went to many refugee camps and saw libraries, what they were doing. This is a place, the Alonis Refugee Camp outside of Athens, 2018. Here we met a group called Libraries Without Borders, and they were doing some remarkable work with education. They had this ideas box designed by Philippe Stark that wound up traveling around to different refugee camps, including library material. And this, again, for us was quite moving. And then the Bibliothèque Molenbeek in Brussels, Belgium. This was the 2015 Molenbeek was where the terrorists that carried out the bomb attacks in Paris and Brussels came from, killing 162 people. So it points to the tension between the refugee communities and the communities that take them in. This was the public library, and we went there it happened to be on Ramadan, so nobody was in the library except for the 3 librarians, who were wonderful. And but it was a tense place. It was a very difficult as the taking in of refugees and how to deal with them, how that gets played out. But we were glad to see that at least they had this library that was there. Another area that we were very interested in is the idea of borders and libraries. This is on the left, a library in West Berlin built during the Cold War called the American Memorial Library. And on the right is a Berlin City Library built in what was in the Cold War in East Berlin. So these were two libraries, essentially dueling libraries of different sides of the conflict on the most contested border and most dangerous border of that time period. And it's interesting to see how libraries can be incorporated and used in this way. The American Library on the left was built as an expression of, openness to people using and getting information, and sort of important, kind of a soft power Cold War tool, but it was open at that time. People from East Berlin could come into the West before the wall was put up, and this was a way that the Cold War was played out in different ways, and this was one of them. Another interesting library that's literally built on top of a border is the library called the Haskell Free Library and Opera House, which is built on the border between Quebec, Canada, and Vermont, the United States. And that is literally the borderline running through the library in the children's section, the Black Line. And that was an early 20th century expression of using the library as a way of bringing people together. It seems ironic now for us, thinking about how tense we are about borders. But I think this is maybe a model. It would be interesting to see if we could ever think about building libraries on borders, and like, for instance, Ukraine and Russia, or Pakistan and India, or even Mexico and the United States. These are just an idea that I think this library was way ahead of its time. This is a friend of ours, MV, on the left, who's on a grant. We're doing mapping research in the old city in Jerusalem. And so again, the issue of the border is very interesting. The woman on the right, the hands are part of the Budieri Library, and this is a librarian. They were kind of working together on this map. This is the men's prayer area on the Western Wall, Old City, Jerusalem, 2019. And I was aware that there was a library in here. And so I walked in and was very, kind of tried not to disturb people. And people were very involved in the prayers. And I noticed people were taking a few cell phone photos. So I did that. No one seemed to care. And then I pulled out my Nikon and took a few photos. And again, no one seemed to really care. Everybody was really involved. And I was very conscious of not disturbing people. Right within a very short distance away is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which also is one of the most sacred places, in this case for Islam, and on top of the Temple Mount. And this was a place we couldn't go to. We were not Muslim, but right next door was the Al-Aqsa Mosque library, which was open to the public, and we were able to go in and photograph. They had a great children's library, a lot of well-used Harry Potter books in Arabic. It was just a fascinating, amazing place in a very troubled area, part of the world. And then finally, we did find ourselves kind of another subject that came up, being interested in changing spaces and sacred places, the idea that libraries can evolve. So this is just simply a library and a train station in Haarlem, the Netherlands, 2016. It's a triptych image, 3 images, but they knew that commuters read a lot, but the library was set up in the train station to respond and put the library where the people are. And it's a very popular place. This was the floor of the Russian State Library for Young Adults, the Nossoff Mansion in Moscow, Russia, 2016. And this was built in 1903 as a Russian Art Nouveau mansion. In the 1990s, the Russian State Library for Young Adults took over, and it has a great music department, 40,000 items for music. And our guide's beautiful blue dress just, I think, sort of contrasted very nicely with the Art Nouveau style parquet floor that you see in the image. It was just this idea that libraries are evolve. Sometimes original purpose of a building would turn into something else, and this was part of that. The sacred spaces part of this also was the libraries evolving and changing. During the Holocaust, all 2,500 members of the Tarnograds, Poland's Jewish community, were murdered by the Germans. And after the war, the synagogue of that community, it was used in many different ways, and eventually it became this public library. Very haunting, very difficult. We actually did a kind of a tour around many of the communities in this part of Poland, looking at former synagogues that had become libraries. Here was another one in the city of Niblick, or the small town of Niblick. It's a former synagogue, now library and community center. Had the finest paintings of former synagogue we'd ever seen. It was just astonishing. Small little library, but still the haunting memory of the place, and it comes through with those paintings. We also went to some spectacular, beautiful libraries, and this was one in wedding and library tour in Wimbledon, Ulm, Germany, 2016. So I set up my camera, I was going to take a picture of this library, and then of course the tour group walks right in. And then right after that, a wedding group walks right in. So this is one of the uses of this very over-the-top Rococo library, but it's also considered one of the most beautiful libraries in the world. One of the other transformations or changes of libraries was we saw in Canada, there's a large drop of church attendance in once very Catholic Quebec province in Canada, and some of the churches that had been let go became libraries, and this was one of the ones in Quebec that we photographed, the Bibliothèque Claire-Montagne, in 2019. And then finally, the last subject or category we'll look at is this one, that is the librarian section. And this was one of our favorite parts of the whole project, is meeting the librarians, the people, the professionals that really deal and make a difference in the lives of so many people. Tragically, this library is in a town called Dnipro in Ukraine. It's a kind of eastern Ukraine. We were, at the time, it was 2016, they said, a 3-hour drive from the hot war that was going on in the Donbass in the eastern Ukraine. And this library did a lot. I mean, these were the most generous, caring, kind people that we have ever met. And these librarians were now, unfortunately, on the front line. I've heard that Dnipro has been bombed and attacked. Fortunately, it hasn't had street fighting yet. But at the time in 2016, they were conducting a bottle cap fundraising drive to provide prosthesis for their soldiers that were returning from the war in 2016. In the West, we didn't really hear that much or understand the hot war that was going on at that time. And now, of course, everybody knows about it. But these librarians, I wish them well. It's a tragedy to think of their lives, what they're all going through right now, and the incredible fear they must have. This was a librarian, special collections librarian in Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, the Holocaust Museum. And this man too also took us on an amazing tour of the collection there, and the books and the book collection. Very meaningful for us. And I do think it's an important thing for people to see the Yad Vashem if they travel to Israel. The Russian State Library, again, in Moscow, in Russia in 2016. I tried to get into this library many, many times, and unfortunately never got a response. And the day I was photographing the exterior, Ellen just kind of walked right inside and got an appointment for the next day. So we wound up photographing this book museum. And then this librarian, the woman here in the picture, took us on a tour throughout the Russian State Library. It's called the Lenin Library. And it was truly a life-changing experience to see this incredible place, one of the largest libraries in the world. The book museum was filled with these ancient books that we found out later. Some of them had been stolen from Germany and Poland at the end of World War II. And of course, probably some of those same books have been stolen from Russia by the German army during the war. So this was the largest repository of the books stolen by the Soviet army at the end of World War II, which we didn't know at the time when we took this photo. I mentioned the Vernowsky National Library of Kiev in Ukraine. It's one of the largest national libraries in the world. And during World War II, the entire collection was put on a train and taken out of Kiev before the Nazis German army invaded. And now is, again, threatened by destruction and war. So I fear for this place. But we were given this astonishing all-day tour of this world-class library. And one of the things we saw was the gifts that were given to the presidents of Ukraine, including this big tapestry of Soviet Republic leaders. And I asked the librarian to stand in front of it as a kind of a contrast. It's sort of amazing to see. And of course, the National Library of Israel, ta-da, one of the great libraries, and we were the beneficiaries of their kindness and really throwing open their collection to us. We were given 2 months of kind of unlimited access to just about everything, and it was one of the highlights of our trip. And we were very, very thankful. One of the sponsors for them to sponsor us and to give us the enormous access that they did. And then the Estens Library in Modena. I was just wanting to put this in as an example of librarians and their pride. These two young librarians gave us a kind of a full afternoon tour of this, one of the most amazing libraries in Europe, a very rich and incredible rich collection. And they were so proud to show us this remarkable archive, and it shows in the face of the librarian. And then finally, the Budieri Library I mentioned earlier. This is the librarian, and she's showing us some of the books from their collection. Kind of a poor library, but right in the heart of the center of an epic struggle that's going on right now. So it's interesting to see the different uses, the different ways that librarians engage with the situation that they're in. We did work with making images throughout this period of time, both on the Fulbright in 2018 and 19, on the earlier trip to Europe in 2016, and also driving across Canada. So Elle and I spent a lot of time together, worked together, and I even photographed her here on the a visit to Kinneret College. We went to one day in the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and the college is a great example of about 50% Jewish, 50% Arab students, and it just provided perhaps a model for what can be the future of young people integrating and coming together. And this image, I think, was just so meaningful because it was just some form of little free library on the edge of the Sea of the Galilee, and it was just almost mind-boggling for us to understand the context of the world of what we were in at this point. A little overwhelming. And also here I am photographing a group of African refugees working with this group, Libraries Without Borders, in Palermo, Sicily in 2018. During this time, I photographed all day of this remarkable place and these young African refugees. And then that night, driving through the streets of Catania in Sicily, my camera was in the back seat of the car, and somebody jumped in and robbed the camera and all the lenses and all the images that I had made that day. So this is the only image we have that Ellen took with her cell phone. But I think it gives a sense of what it was we were trying to do. And a couple of weeks later, I got a new camera gear, and most of the images on this Fulbright were back in our apartment in Naples and on a hard drive. So nothing was lost except for, unfortunately, the very good images of that day. And then this last image is our most favorite item from all of these road trips around the world, our Ukrainian library cards that were given to us by those very generous librarians in Ukraine. We will treasure this forever. All right. Well, I think we might have a little bit of time to take in questions if anybody wants to ask them.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much. It was really incredible and beautiful presentation. So many great pictures, Robert and Ellen. And I'm sorry again for this small issue at the beginning, but it all went well. Yeah, there are a couple of questions. I will read it, but first of all, myself, I wanted to ask, is this project like ongoing, or is it rather a closed chapter for you? But if yes, of ongoing, so what are your plans for future?
Definitely
Hey,
ongoing.
Ellen, 1 second. You might want to stop your share
Sharing
screen.
screen. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, hold on.
Let's see.
On the, yeah, stop share and then.
Red.
Okay, there you
Yeah,
go.
now we see you better.
Okay.
Good, and you can hear us. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry for the confusion. So, yeah, I guess we definitely want to continue the project. We're always thinking of new things. We've ironically, in the last couple of years, have driven across the country, partly because of COVID. We didn't want to fly, and we have a place in Vermont, so we would do a cross-country trip. And we started one, as Bob mentioned, the photographs in Canada, and looking at the Native and Indigenous peoples and how those libraries were working, and the whole concept of education and books with Indigenous peoples. And Bob had also, during the American Public Library Project, been looking at the role of public libraries in the United States and segregation, and the whole history of the roles that various libraries played in the American South. So we'll probably continue to strengthen that part of the project. And it kind of segues into the borders and refugees also. We're hoping to work, our next probably big trip would be Mexico, but we keep waiting for it to get a little safer. The State Department just issued something recently, I saw. And so I don't know, we have some good connections, and we're hoping that we can work with the Library of Congress in the US is hoping to help us with some introductions in Mexico, and look at some of the libraries there and the relation to education. Also, we haven't done any of the British Isles, Ireland, England, Wales. That would be great. It'd be easy because we speak the language. I mean, we did all of this. It's very embarrassing how many people can speak English. And we did all these projects in all these countries without speaking any foreign language, which is really embarrassing. High school French and high school Spanish, and that's about it. So, and then, Asia, I mean, there's a world of really interesting things there. And
well, and
Nordic and Africa
is a really interesting area for me. South Africa and the libraries in Namibia and North Africa. I mean, all over Africa. It's just, if you start to do a little bit of the research on those places, they're just fascinating. And what the libraries are doing in those places. The stories, again, that are connected to African libraries, Middle Eastern libraries, Asian libraries. Those are all places that I think I would like to know and photograph. And I think we definitely would like to include that in this big public expression. It's just all time and money. All you have to do is get the money to do it and have the time to do it. So we'll see. We'll
and our help.
And we'll make it work.
Fortunately, we have Fulbright, so how you will be able to visit all the possible continents. Okay,
I love the Fulbright.
We love to. Okay, before I will read the next question, I will just pass your website, because some of our attendees would like to maybe get access to more of your work. So I just sent via chat your Robert's website. And now I will follow the next question, which is actually from Naomi. The question is, you spend a lot of time photographing, documenting libraries in the States and now more broadly around the world. Did the library character carry through in similar ways, or did you experience key differences?
Well, it's a good question, because that was what we wanted to know. I'd really 18 years photographing libraries throughout the United States. I was especially interested in the stories of the libraries. I use photography to help tell the stories of the places. And I feel in some ways doing that project, I know the United States in a way that most people don't, because I've understood it through the local libraries of each of the communities. When you go to other countries, obviously the stories are different, as I mentioned before. And so those stories to me are astonishing and unique. And I feel that we all need to hear about each other as people, and libraries represent a human created institution, but we have more in common than what separates us. And I think the library is a good way of looking at that. I felt that about the United States too. I think as divisive as things are now in the US, the local public libraries are a way of bringing the country together. And I think I've always felt that. I've always felt, and I think in the world too.
And I guess I would say that starting with our trip in 2016, which we went with our young son, and it was quite an ambitious project. And we decided, well, maybe we should look at more than just public libraries, because the public library tradition was not as robust, I would say, generally throughout Europe. And libraries tended to be more passive, as Bob mentioned earlier, particularly the big libraries. They were more passive archives for researchers. And what we saw in 2016, at least what I experienced, was the libraries, many of the libraries opening up to the community, whether it was refugees or just the general public, but informing the public that yes, they could come in and they could take a book. Some of the libraries now actually are lending libraries, and a lot of national libraries are not yet. That's kind of a big push. I don't know if the new National Library, are you actually a lending library or not? I can't remember. But that was
we are. We are a lending library, but not all the books can be.
Right. So that was one thing that we started to see, and whether it was on the national library scale or the community systems or whatever, that the libraries were really becoming more community centers, places, where you could do presentations, lectures, conferences, film screenings, book reading, read aloud to children, all that kind of stuff that we saw really kind of opening up throughout Europe, which we found very exciting. There were still a lot of little old libraries that were kind of shut down. We saw the whole range, but I do think that's a big change in our society globally, that people are seeing what this resource is, and it's not just for scholars. It's really for all of us to learn our history and to preserve our history. One of my big things is newspapers. I'm very concerned about the preservation of local and regional newspapers that are so big that most places can't scan them, and they wither away in the heat and humidity and wars and stuff like that, and that those histories will be lost forever. So I say that would be most of our changes that we saw.
Lovely. Which actually brings us to a third question, another question from Catherine Sullivan. With the national libraries as sites of historical memories, what directions do they take in collections of building contemporary memories, according to you? From what you've seen.
I'm not sure I'm much of an authority on that. I mean, we did see a lot of libraries that were collecting oral histories and doing the one-on-one with particularly with seniors, a lot of programs with bringing seniors in or taking young people out into the community to interview seniors. And there's a thing called the Human Library or something, where they will interview people and get their stories. That's one thing. Some libraries, I guess, because all newspapers are digital now, they're able to preserve those, and people have access to whatever's been scanned or has been recently is digitized. So that history, that contemporary history is available to people.
I think the national libraries are one part of the preservation of memories. I think in some ways, the local libraries or the regional libraries, being closer to the communities perhaps and being part of that, are where you find a lot of that, the preservation of memories. That's why the library in the formerly called Auschwitz community in Poland was a little bit of a surprise, because that's a local library, and yet and historically that memory is, you know, what most people think of when they think of that place, and yet they kind of decided not to preserve that memory, which is a little bit shocking to me, because so much of my experience with libraries throughout the United States and other places is the local libraries are the repository of civic memory. There's a place where people remember themselves and their past, and sometimes honor it. It's why you see a lot of, you know, in the United States, a war memorial from the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, on your little local libraries in various places. So it's an interesting. I think that type of memory you're talking about certainly resides in the national libraries, but I think it may be in some ways even stronger in the local, small regional libraries.
Yeah, so actually, speaking about public libraries and national libraries, there's a question from Sandra. What about private libraries? Did you have any access to them? Or you were concentrated on the public libraries?
That's a very good question, and we really grappled with that one, because it was very clear for me doing the American Public Library Project. It was public. I was interested in the publicly held part of what a library was. It was a commons, it was a shared thing. And when we went to Europe, we found the libraries are very differently organized, and we wound up not necessarily, the public libraries were sometimes part of a university, or they were involved in some other, you know, so the definition of what a library is, even a public library, was different in Europe. And so we just found that to be a different way of looking at it. So we expanded, because of that, we expanded the scope of the project to include public and private, or public-private connections, or even religious libraries or university libraries. These were all kind of a different way of, because it became less about the commons, less about that shared space, and more about all these other things that we've been interested in.
And many of them were in transition, because most libraries, I think you could say, were founded on the private 1 or 2 or 3, you know, massive private collections. That's how many of the now public or academic libraries were founded. So I think there's a lot of transition going on now, and once these libraries can scan and digitize the information, it'll be revolutionary, really.
And Italy was just an embarrassment of riches of these old, originally private, wealthy libraries that later became public libraries and have this incredible history. So that's, again, it made this whole thing very much more deeper and much more complicated. It's not just the public libraries that we're looking at now.
Okay, and the last question, actually a bit different, but very practical. Alessandra Alio, so I understand an Italian attendee of our lecture. From the libraries you visited, how many have coffee shops integrated in the library?
I love her, because we are terrible coffee fanatics, you know, and I love it. Mostly the big, beautiful national libraries, you know, I mean, I love the energy of the cafe in the National Library in Israel. I mean, there was so much going on there, you know, people would meet for coffee and have a meeting with some staff member. People were coming and going. It was like such a lively place. And we did see, you know, a fair amount, but they were more in the new the new libraries.
Yeah, and we did see that big transformation of libraries just being about books to becoming more community centers.
Yeah.
So that's something that we see. Coffee shop is kind of part of that, but
Yeah,
also,
definitely.
for instance, exhibition spaces
Yeah.
where I know in the new National Library of Israel, there will be an exhibition space, and in all these other libraries, the bigger libraries had fantastic. And so that's a place of bringing people together over just community. I mean, sharing the idea of community, and coffee is a big part of that for us. But you know, it's just one part of this larger expression of community centers.
Okay, and last but not least, you mentioned that you will have an exhibition in San Francisco soon. So maybe you can say a few words for our audience. If someone is from the West Coast, he might jump and visit.
Yes, so there'll be a big exhibition of about 40, 50 prints of Bob's photographs at the San Francisco Public Library, and opens on June 11th. And it will actually be up, because they had some cancellation or something, it'll be up through November. And we can send that link for when it opens. And we also are going to be showing an limited edition artist handbound album of this work in 2 weeks at a National Artist Book Fair called Codex, CODEX. I could send you that link. And so we'll be showing that, and that has many of these images in the album. So we're getting the word out. So.
And the public library exhibit in San Francisco will also have a number of public programs around the exhibit, including this idea of the Bibliocide and preservation of resources. And perhaps, because there's such a strong interest in it here, Ukrainian and Russian libraries and refugees. And there's one guy on staff at the San Francisco Library that I believe is Ukrainian, and he will be helping to organize that and bring that together. So I think that's going to be a very timely thing related to the growing Ukrainian and Russian community in the Bay Area here in San Francisco, that will try to use that those images from the study of those two places to really maybe help bring those communities together, or to find ways of common ground. That's one thing I think libraries can be really good for.
Yeah.
Great to hear. So good luck with the exhibition. Thank you very much for this really wonderful presentation. I'm happy we host you here tonight, or this morning for you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much once again. Good luck with the project. Thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to coming to the new library soon.
Oh, yeah, you will, definitely.
We look forward to having you visit. You're going to flip.
Oh, great. So good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Your work is wonderful. Really.
Thank you.
Inspiring.
Very much inspiring. Thank you very much.
Okay,
And
bye-bye.
have a lovely day. Bye. Thank you for coming.